And looking at how this deal has been undone, it's a big blow, but one that was probably anticipated.
Yes, it was. And what it'll do is just the opposite of what you said there. It'll increase barriers and it'll reduce innovation. It's a real message to companies and countries in the region that the United States is not going to be that involved. And for really innovative moves, very innovative trade deals, you're going to have to look to China.
David, similar sentiments? Do you feel innovation could really be hit by this?
Well, I think, what the tech companies are most concerned about is retaining access to the Chinese market for those of them that have access and gaining access if they don't. Ironically, the TPP was actually a strategic partnership aimed at combating China's influence, which is not the way it's ever been understood or discussed by either Trump or Bernie Sanders. So in a way, by canceling it, we're taking sort of a stone out of our pocket that we could have tossed at China in a sense. So I think in a way it's a strategically foolish thing to do. But I don't think anything really changes in the short term for the tech companies, because this is a pact that was not enforced yet. And I think for the time being, we're still at the status quo. It's just we are talking a lot, as is often the way these days.
Indeed, and let's talk some more. Isaac, give us your sense of the bigger picture here, the relationship with China. It has been a frustration to many of the tech giants that they've been perhaps not able to access that market. What is needed? Is that going to be even more frustrated going forward?
I think it will, for one of the reasons that David just mentioned, in that we have one less bargaining chip. So many in China saw the TPP as a way for America to encircle China. There are 12 countries, 11 besides the United States. A lot of them were countries that were near the border of China, and it was a way of showing to China that the United States was going to have a major presence in Asia, something that, frankly, the Chinese really don't want. So if we wanted to negotiate with the Chinese on issues of market access, one of the things we would be able to have done in the past is say, well, we can slow down on the TPP if you are more welcoming to our companies, especially to our tech companies. And now we just lost that bargaining chip.
David, it's interesting. We have had, of course, Jack Ma visiting the United States, trying to push back any concerns of a trade war, saying that in fact would be a disaster. The risk is there. What about, I was just looking at on the terminal on the Bloomberg, and Texas Instruments gets 45% of its revenue from China. There are some big stakes by some tech companies that do have access.
Well, the fact is, all of our major tech companies are profoundly global and get them for all the physical goods companies, the vast majority of their revenues outside the United States, and that's generally true for the software companies as well. And if it isn't true now, it's becoming true. So, the thing that they're all most worried about when it comes to China is that we put in some big barriers against Chinese stuff, and then they retaliate against us. And a company like Apple, where China is their #1 market, really has a lot to lose. But the complexity of this is way bigger than Trump seems to appreciate, because there isn't really a national origin for most tech products. They are the product of a complex global supply chain that involves things shipping from the U.S. to China and then back to the U.S. and vice versa. And so, to think of it in simplified terms, which unfortunately is the way that it's generally discussed, is not going to advance the ball very effectively.
Isaac, what now? There's no deal with some of these countries that were part of this 12-country pact. Where do we go in terms of the U.S. relationship with Southeast Asia in particular?
We don't really go anywhere. At the next stage is China takes up the momentum that we have given up, and they sign regional trade agreements. They push forward One Belt, One Road. They have more multilateral and bilateral relations with all these countries, and we stay behind protecting dozens or hundreds or thousands of steelworker jobs.
And so it sounds like you're pretty negative, it seems there, Isaac. Is there any optimism at all?
Yes. Let's see. Optimism on them canceling the TPP. Well, Trump did something that he said he was going to do. So he shows that he sometimes follows through on what he says.
Maybe at least efficiency might be there. But David, is there any perhaps element that you can see going forward that would make this a more positive story? What needs to happen now for you to have any optimism?
I honestly don't think the TPP is that big of a deal for tech companies, more or less. I think it would have been a positive move, but without it, I don't think we're in a disaster scenario. I think basically I am still optimistic that in some ways Trump's rhetoric could be an effective way of modulating some of the behavior of countries that we have had objections to, and China specifically. I mean, you could argue that even Xi Jinping's very global speech at Davos was a response to Trump, so that's a positive thing. You know, I think Trump is sort of sly like a fox. I don't think he's the best thing in all aspects, but there may be some positives that come out of sort of jawboning on this topic and making companies more cautious when they take anti-American trade actions, which many of them do, and China certainly has done that. We've got good relations now, but I think probably they'll stay pretty good.